Step aside. We have a warrant.
These are my students. You have no right.
Out of the way. Now. We're not moving. Disperse immediately. This is a federal order.
No, we're not moving.
Step aside. Now.
We have rights.
The chalk snapped against the blackboard as Professor Kwarteng Sullivan underlined two words, Combahee River. 43 students sat in tiered seating, laptops open, pens moving, completely absorbed in the lecture they had waited all semester to hear. Harriet Tubman didn't just free slaves, the professor said, her voice carrying to the back row without effort. On June 2nd, 1863, she became the first woman in American history to lead an armed military operation. She planned the raid. She guided the boats. The doors exploded inward. Two men in tactical gear burst into the lecture hall. Black masks covered their faces. Vests emblazoned with 3 letters, ICE. They moved like men who expected no resistance. The chalk slipped from the professor's fingers and shattered on the floor. Abena Kwarteng, the taller one, spoke. His voice was flat, rehearsed. You need to come with us. Now. Silence swallowed the room. 43 students frozen in their seats, 43 hearts pounding against 43 rib cages. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. We share stories of courage, injustice, and the moments that define who we really are. If that sounds like something you need, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happens next in this lecture hall will change how you see everything. The professor's voice came out steady, though her hands trembled at her sides. I'm sorry. What is this about? Immigration enforcement. The agent took a step forward. Don't make this difficult. A rustle in the third row. A young woman rose to her feet. Destiny Okafor, 20 years old, pre-law, daughter of Nigerian immigrants who had taught her that silence in the face of injustice was its own kind of sin. She's a U.S. citizen. Destiny's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She's been teaching here for almost 20 years. Where's your warrant? The agent's eyes narrowed behind his mask. Sit down. This doesn't concern you. It absolutely concerns me. Destiny didn't move, didn't blink. You're in my classroom. Another student stood. Tobias Brennan, senior, lacrosse captain, 6'3" with shoulders like a linebacker. Then Priya Venkatesh rose beside him. Sophomore, barely 5 feet tall, hands shaking but chin raised. One by one, like dominoes falling in reverse, the students rose. The second agent reached toward his belt. Anyone who interferes will be charged with obstruction. Sit down, now. Nobody sat. They moved without coordination, without a plan. Something deeper than thought pushed them forward. They formed a semicircle around their professor. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present. A wall of young bodies between the woman who had taught them about freedom and the masked men who wanted to take her. Professor Kwarteng Sullivan's voice cracked. Everyone, please. I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me. Priya turned to face her professor. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice held firm. Dr. K, you taught us that silence is complicity. You taught us that Tubman didn't run alone. She went back, again and again. Her breath caught. We're not leaving you. 14 cell phones were recording. 3 laptop webcams captured every angle. Whatever happened next would never disappear. The woman standing at that lectern wasn't a criminal. She wasn't undocumented. She wasn't what those agents had been told she was. She was Dr. Abena Kwarteng Sullivan, Yale Ph.D. Fulbright Scholar, U.S. citizen since 2009. The William Monroe Trotter Distinguished Professor of History at Wexford College. Her husband was a retired Boston firefighter. Her twin sons attended Georgetown. She had paid taxes for 31 years. She had voted in every election. She had buried her father in American soil, and 2 masked men had just walked into her classroom to drag her away like cargo. No warrant, no court order, no verification, just an anonymous tip and the assumption that no one would stop them. They thought college students were soft. They thought a quick show of authority would end this in seconds. They thought wrong. What would you do if armed agents burst into your classroom and tried to take your professor without showing a single legal document? Candlelight flickered against concrete walls. A little girl sat cross-legged on a thin mattress, eyes fixed on the water-damaged pages her father held open between them. The book smelled like mildew and survival. Its spine was cracked in 3 places. Read it again, Papa. Her father's voice was hoarse from the dust that never settled in Buduburam. The refugee camp sprawled across Ghana like a wound that wouldn't heal. Liberian families who had fled civil war lived in concrete rooms with no running water, no electricity, no guarantee that tomorrow would come. But every night, Kofi Kwarteng lit a candle and taught his daughter to read. I didn't know I was a slave until I found out I couldn't do the things I wanted. He traced the words with his finger. Frederick Douglass wrote that, Abina. Remember his name. She remembered. She remembered everything. Her mother had died giving birth to her. The camp nurses said it was blood loss. Her father said it was a country that killed its women slowly and called it normal. He had been a university lecturer in Monrovia before the war took everything. Now he washed clothes for other refugees and rationed their rice so carefully that Abena didn't know they were starving until years later. But the books never stopped. He traded labor for borrowed pages. He walked 8 miles to a church library and copied passages by hand. He made her recite Douglas and Du Bois and Baldwin until the words lived inside her chest like a second heartbeat. They can take everything from you except what you know. He said it every night before she slept. Fill your mind until it overflows. At 11 years old, Abena won a church-sponsored scholarship to boarding school in Accra. The morning she left, her father pressed the water-damaged Douglas into her hands and said nothing. He didn't need to. The book said everything. At 17, she earned a full academic scholarship to Oberlin College in Ohio. She flew to America with one suitcase, $47, and her father's voice still echoing in her ears. The other students had parents who called every Sunday. Abena had letters that took 3 weeks to arrive, written on paper so thin she could see through it. She worked 2 jobs and studied until her eyes burned and graduated with honors despite everything that should have stopped her. Ph.D. in African American Studies from Yale, the first person from Buduburam to earn a doctorate from an Ivy League university. Postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard. Fulbright scholar. 2 books on the transatlantic slave trade that became required reading on 3 continents. She met Patrick Sullivan at a library fundraiser in Boston. He was a firefighter with a laugh that filled rooms and hands that had pulled children from burning buildings. 3rd-generation Irish-American. His grandmother had fled famine. He understood what it meant to come from people who survived. They married in a small ceremony. She became a citizen in 2009, hand over heart, tears streaming down her face while Patrick squeezed her fingers. And their twin sons were born the following year. She named them Frederick and Kofi, one for the man who taught her to read, one for the father who never stopped believing. 19 years at Wexford College. Thousands of students who sat in her classroom and left seeing the world differently. Office hours that ran late because she never turned away a young person with questions. Letters from former students who became lawyers, professors, activists. A life built word by word, book by book, lecture by lecture. She had done everything right. Every form filed, every tax paid, every law followed. But on October 17th, 2 men with masks and badges walked into her classroom and treated her like a criminal. They didn't check her citizenship status. They didn't verify the anonymous tip. And they didn't ask a single question that might have revealed the truth. They saw a black woman with an African name and decided she didn't belong. Agent Colt Brannigan had made that decision 27 times before. 27 warrantless raids on college campuses. 24 targeting black or Latino faculty. He had never faced consequences. He had no idea this classroom would be different. These students had spent a semester learning about Harriet Tubman, about Frederick Douglass, about the cost of silence and the power of standing together. They weren't going to sit down. How does it feel to build a life from nothing, only to have strangers in masks decide you don't deserve it? Colt Brannigan checked his watch at 2:31 p.m., 12 minutes until showtime. He adjusted his mask in the reflection of his truck's window and smiled at what he saw. 16 years with immigration and customs enforcement. 16 years of building a reputation. The Burlington field office was his kingdom, and he ruled it without oversight, without questions, without anyone telling him what he couldn't do. His partner, Victor Stokes, sat in the passenger seat scrolling through his phone. Transfer from Texas. He missed the border, missed the chaos and the numbers and the feeling of doing something that mattered. Vermont was too quiet, too polite, too soft. Today would fix that. You ready? Brannigan asked. Stokes pocketed his phone. Born ready. Let's bag this one and get back before traffic. The tip had come through the anonymous hotline that morning, with 6 words that made Brannigan's pulse quicken. Illegal African woman teaching at Wexford, fake documents. He didn't verify, didn't check her employment records, didn't contact campus security or request a warrant. Warrants meant paperwork. Paperwork meant delays. Delays meant someone might warn her. Brannigan had learned long ago that speed beat procedure. Get in, get the target, get out. Let the lawyers sort it out later. He texted Stokes at 7:43 a.m. that morning. The message would later become Exhibit 14A in a federal lawsuit. African professor at Liberal College. Easy headline. Let's bag her before someone tips her off. And later, at 11:15 a.m. These campus kids won't do anything. Too soft. We'll be in and out. The texts revealed something Brannigan never said out loud. He didn't see targets. He saw opportunities. A successful campus arrest meant news coverage. News coverage meant visibility. Visibility meant Washington noticed. Washington noticing meant promotions. Bodies processed. Numbers met. Career advanced. He had done this 27 times in 5 years. 27 warrantless approaches on college campuses across Vermont and New Hampshire. 24 of those targets were Black or Latino faculty and staff. His success rate for actual immigration violations? 3%. 27 raids. 26 innocent people terrorized. 1 actual case. Any legitimate law enforcement agency would have pulled his badge years ago. But the Burlington field office answered to Director Harold Puckett, a man who valued statistics over accuracy and never questioned how Brannigan got his numbers. The anonymous tip that launched the October 17th raid was never investigated. If anyone had looked, they would have discovered the email account was created 6 hours before the message was sent. They would have traced the IP address to a known white supremacist forum. They would have identified the sender as a former Wexford student expelled 3 years earlier for harassing a black professor. The same Professor Brannigan was about to target. But no one looked. No one questioned. No one asked why an anonymous tipster would know a professor's immigration status when that information wasn't public. Brannigan saw what he wanted to see, a chance to make headlines. A target who fit the profile he had built in his mind over 16 years. A liberal campus full of kids who would film everything and do nothing. He was right about one thing, and they did film everything. He was catastrophically wrong about the rest. Inside Founders Hall, 43 students had spent the semester reading about Harriet Tubman's military tactics. They had studied Frederick Douglass's resistance strategies. They had debated whether ordinary people had the obligation to intervene when they witnessed injustice. Their professor had taught them that history wasn't something that happened to other people in distant times. History happened in lecture halls and courtrooms and moments when you had to decide who you really were. In 6 minutes, Colt Brannigan would walk through those doors expecting compliance. He would find something else entirely, and a junior agent named Carla Munoz, who had been secretly documenting Brannigan's hunting trips for 11 months. I would finally have the evidence she needed to bring him down. Do you think agents like Brannigan are bad apples, or does the system create them on purpose? Tobias Brennan stepped forward until he stood inches from Agent Brannigan's mask. 6'3", 220 pounds, captain of the lacrosse team, hands steady at his sides despite the fear screaming in his chest. Gentlemen, his voice carried across the lecture hall, I'm pre-law, and I know you need a warrant or a court order to detain someone on private property. Do you have either? Brannigan's jaw tightened behind the mask. 16 years of doing this, and he had never once been challenged by a college student. He had walked into dorm rooms, faculty offices, campus cafeterias. People stepped aside. People complied. That was how this worked. Step back, son, while you're interfering with federal officers. Tobias didn't move. Show me the warrant and I'll step back. Stokes reached for his belt. His hand hovered near the zip ties that hung beside his holster. Kid, you're about to catch an obstruction charge. Everyone in this room who doesn't sit down in the next 10 seconds is getting arrested. Nobody sat. The semicircle around Professor Quarting Sullivan tightened. Bodies pressed closer together. Shoulders touched shoulders. 43 students who had walked into this lecture hall as individuals now stood as something else entirely. A wall. A choice made flesh. Destiny Okafor's phone was raised, recording every second. Her hand trembled, but the camera stayed focused on Brannigan's face. Evidence. Whatever happened next would be documented. This is your final warning. Brannigan's voice cracked with something that might have been anger, or might have been the first flicker of doubt. Disperse now, or face federal charges. Priya Venkatesh spoke from the center of the semicircle. Her voice was soft, but somehow reached every corner of the room. Dr. K taught us about the Fugitive Slave Act. She taught us that ordinary people hid runaway slaves in their basements, even though it meant prison. She taught us that doing right sometimes means breaking their rules. She turned to face her professor. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her spine stayed straight. You taught us this, Dr. K. Every lecture, every reading, every discussion about what it means to stand for something. Did you think we weren't listening? Professor Quarting Sullivan pressed her hand against her mouth. For 31 years in America, 19 years in this classroom, thousands of students who had passed through these doors. She had taught them about resistance as history. She never imagined they would teach it back to her as action. Minute 11. The lecture hall doors opened again. Campus security officers rushed in, confusion on their faces. Minute 14. Dean Constance Whitmore pushed through the crowd. Silver-haired, 70 years old, 35 years at Wexford. Her voice cut through the chaos like ice. What exactly is happening in my building? Brannigan straightened. Federal Immigration Enforcement, ma'am. This woman is Dr. Abena Quarting Sullivan, tenured professor, U.S. citizen, employee of this institution for nearly 2 decades. The dean's eyes were cold. Where is your warrant? We don't need a warrant. We have credible information that... Where is your court order? Silence. Brannigan's hand flexed at his side. Stokes shifted his weight from foot to foot. Minute 17. 2 local police officers arrived. They recognized the dean immediately. They did not recognize the masked agents. Minute 19. Professor Gerald Hutchinson from the Constitutional Law Department pushed into the room. He had heard shouting from the hallway. One look at the scene told him everything he needed to know. Officers, he addressed the local police, ignoring the ICE agents entirely. These men have detained a U.S. citizen without documentation. That is unlawful imprisonment under Vermont state law. Brannigan's mask couldn't hide the sweat gathering at his temples. This was supposed to be simple. In and out. No resistance. No lawyers. No witnesses who knew what they were looking at. We have an anonymous tip. An anonymous tip is not a warrant. Dean Whitmore stepped closer. Her voice dropped to something quiet and devastating. You have no legal authority to be in this classroom. You have no documentation to detain this woman. And you have approximately 30 seconds to leave my campus before I instruct campus security to escort you out and these officers to file charges. 23 minutes. That's how long the standoff lasted. Brannigan and Stokes retreated through those doors without their target, without their headline, without any idea that everything they had done was recorded, documented, and already being uploaded to servers they would never be able to reach. And somewhere in the Burlington field office, a junior agent named Carla Munoz was making copies of files she had been gathering for 11 months. Dates, targets, text messages, evidence of a pattern that would cost her boss everything. The students held the line. Now the system was about to answer. If you were one of those students, would you have risked arrest to protect your professor? The lawsuit landed on federal desks like a bomb nobody saw coming. U.S. District Court, District of Vermont. 4 defendants named Agent Colt Brannigan, Agent Victor Stokes, Field Office Director Harold Puckett, and the Department of Homeland Security. The complaint was 51 pages, every detail documented, every minute of those 23 minutes accounted for, every text message subpoenaed, every prior raid catalogued. Government attorneys reviewed the evidence and requested an immediate settlement. They offered $3.2 million, confidential, no admission of wrongdoing, standard procedure for cases that could embarrass the agency. Professor Quarting Sullivan refused. They came back with $6 million, sealed records, no press, no trial. She refused again. Her attorney, a civil rights lawyer named Gwendolyn Tate, who had spent 40 years fighting cases everyone said were unwinnable, asked her why she kept turning down the money. Because my students need to see this through. The professor's voice was steady. They risked everything in that classroom. They deserve to watch accountability happen in public. Discovery began 2 months later. What it uncovered made national news for 3 consecutive weeks. 27 warrantless campus raids in 5 years. And 24 targeting Black or Latino faculty and staff. A 3% success rate for actual violations. Text messages that revealed Brannigan's true motivations. The anonymous tip traced to a white supremacist forum. A former student with a grudge and a keyboard. But the most devastating evidence came from inside the Burlington office itself. Agent Carla Munoz, 34 years old, 11 years with ICE. She had watched Brannigan operate for 3 of those years. She had documented his hunting trips in secret, waiting for the moment when someone would listen. Her testimony was devastating. Dates, names, patterns. She described a culture where numbers mattered more than truth, where quotas trumped justice, where agents competed to see who could process the most bodies. She risked her career, her pension, her safety. When the defense attorney asked why she came forward, her answer was simple: because I became an agent to protect people, not to hunt them. 41 of the 43 students who witnessed the incident testified. Destiny Okafor flew back from a summer internship in London. Tobias Brennan postponed his LSAT. A young woman named Kayana Williams left her grandmother's funeral early. When the judge asked Kayana why she came, her answer silenced the courtroom. Professor K taught me that justice doesn't wait. Neither will I. The defense attorney tried to minimize the incident during Dr. Quating Sullivan's testimony. Professor, you were never physically touched, never handcuffed, never transported. Isn't this simply a misunderstanding? She removed her glasses, folded them carefully. When she spoke, then her voice carried the weight of 2 continents and 52 years of surviving what others could not imagine. I came to this country as a refugee child with nothing. I earned everything I have. I have paid taxes for 31 years. I have voted in every election since 2009. I have buried my father in American soil. She paused, and in 13 seconds, 2 men with badges told me none of that mattered. Her voice dropped. The courtroom held its breath. You ask if I was physically harmed. My students watched their professor stand helpless while masked men tried to drag her away like cargo. Some of them have not returned to my classroom. They are afraid. They wonder if they are next. She looked at the jury. That is the harm. That is what your misunderstanding cost. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. If $14.8 million, $6.3 million in compensatory damages, $7 million in punitive damages, $1.5 million to establish the Quating Sullivan Scholars Program for first-generation immigrant students pursuing careers in civil rights law. Agent Colt Brannigan was terminated and indicted on federal civil rights charges. Agent Victor Stokes resigned and lost his pension. Director Harold Puckett was forced into early retirement. The anonymous tipster faced federal charges for filing a false report. 3 months after the verdict, Professor Quating Sullivan returned to Founders Hall. Same room, same tiered seating, same spot where her chalk had shattered on the floor. Except this time, the room was standing room only. Students who had never taken her class came just to be present. Faculty lined the walls, and the college president sat in the back row. She walked to the lectern, looked out at the faces of young people who had chosen her over their own safety. Her voice was thick when she finally spoke. History is not something that happened to other people in distant times. It happens in lecture halls and courtrooms and moments when you have to decide who you really are. She steadied herself. Those 43 students didn't have law degrees. They didn't have weapons. They didn't have any guarantee they wouldn't be arrested. They had a choice, and they chose to stand. She picked up a fresh piece of chalk. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, the Combahee River Raid. June 2nd, 1863. Harriet Tubman becomes the first woman in American history to lead an armed military operation. The lecture continued. And in the back of the room, Destiny Okafor, I now accepted to Yale Law School, quietly recorded every word. That's not a settlement. That's not a verdict. That's legacy. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. We share stories like this every week. Stories of courage, stories of justice, stories of ordinary people who refused to stay silent when it mattered most. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to choose between staying safe and doing right? Share your experience. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you know someone who needs this message, share this video. Justice doesn't spread itself. People do. Until next time, stay brave, stand together, and never forget that the choices you make in a single moment can echo for generations.